So now that we've talked about creating invisibility cloaks and creating materials that we can't see, that all sounds quite sci-fi if you ask me. And
It
so that
does.
certainly seems like a space where movies start to care. And so how does the popular perception of nanotechnology play into our understanding of it?
The thing about the media or the way that science is popularized in general, I feel, there's all these articles about like the like crazy properties of materials, like graphene, carbon nanotubes have these like crazy properties, but you don't necessarily see it realized. And part of it's the stuff we talked about before, different, policy issues, toxicity issues, also being hard to manufacture. It's hard to produce graphene on a large scale, figure out what substrate to grow it on. And so it hasn't become this like big crazy thing yet. But I feel like, the media likes to popularize that, like, oh, this could be really cool. And then they use it in movies, I think often as kind of a cop out, like in the Marvel universe, in the Iron Man suit, and also in Black Panther, like Iron Man and Shuri independently came up with like the idea of nanites and these like nano robots. They kind of just say, oh, the nanotechnology as a just general term to explain all the crazy stuff that they're doing. I think that honestly, all the stuff in movies is eventually possible. I mean, look, this invisibility cloak, like one day Harry Potter's gonna be obsolete. Everyone's gonna be like, why was that so magical? Like, literally have all those things. It's crazy. Because when it comes down to it, all nanotechnology is just like manipulating physics, manipulating electrons. Like, oh, this has a positive and negative charges. Put them together. We can make them come together. That's programming, materials by selectively choosing them. The superhero suits. The idea is just you have a bunch of really tiny, nano robots, and they can all come together. And I think that the idea of like manipulating something on such a small scale, and then like if you can manipulate the smallest scale, you can make anything, you can manipulate anything. That's the reason why our cells are so small, our atoms are so small. Theoretically, if we're all made of atoms, if we can manipulate those atoms, we can make anything. So I think that's why, in the media they just say nanotechnology all the time in fiction and sci-fi, because it's kind of an easy way to just explain a big concept or how to make something invincible, because it's kind of a crazy field. Like anything is really possible. Yeah,
I
I don't
completely
really have much
agree.
on that. I mean, I had to like look into some of, like what is the science behind the Iron Man suit? But there really isn't much there because we don't really know a ton about nanotechnology.
No, exactly.
He
I
does say like the eigenvalues
Yeah, you threw out
the movies,
eigenvalues at some point. That was
just
weird.
I feel like that it's the same thing with anything where they say, oh, the nanotechnology. He was like, I just need the eigenvalues and then they can solve time travel. Eigenvalues, just college level math. I don't
yeah,
know.
for the normal viewer, they just have to sound smart, and then people will be like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But the reality behind it is, since no one really knows, then obviously the writers of the movie aren't going to have this vast knowledge of how exactly that suit could be made. Otherwise it would already be made, right? I was watching Iron Man 2 the other day. Don't ask me why. I think it's the only Iron Man movie on Amazon Prime, but it was a family night. But
Okay.
they Tony Stark actually created a new element,
Yeah.
and it showed that, and it was basically, I don't know, some sort of laser that ended up cutting through his entire building until it was focused on this one triangle piece, right? I don't know what it was made of, but it looked like a metal, but somehow by this fission reaction or whatever, by focusing that laser on there, it somehow created a new element that could solve his heart problem. I mean, sorry for the spoilers, but that movie is 8 years old. But
Yeah.
the science behind it did not make sense at all to me, but it just had to look cool, and I think that's what
Yeah.
the movies really try to do.
And I do think they take elements of science, like there is some sort of
Certainly.
reaction at play.
Right.
There is, it's an element. It's a different element. Um,
Yeah.
but they stretch it so that they can fit the things that they want to do. But I also think that's really cool because it kind of gives people like us scientists, everybody, ideas of what things could look like and what we could do. And like
Exactly.
the media, even though it's not necessarily true, it's like pushing the limits of what science could do and just showing us like, if you believe that is possible, like it'll happen. like this invisibility cloak.
Exactly.
Crazy.
No, that's a good point, because as it pertains to making elements, the common trope in movies is, aside from, I mean, nanotechnology is kind of one trope, just to be like, we have this really novel scientific thing and it just works. And the knee-jerk reaction is just, oh, nanotechnology. But there's also some truth to, you can actually fabricate super heavy elements that are, beyond the heaviest end of the periodic table in very small concentrations. I don't know if one would say they're like nano concentration per se, but it's an interesting example, because we've now gotten up to like element 118. The current theory is that element 120 should be next, if we can get there. So
Yeah,
we'll,
probably.
we'll have to see if any of these are actually stable enough to do cool things with, or if they all just decompose in like, a few seconds. But definitely nanotechnology is the common way of illustrating cool properties in films, because, as Puneeth explained with metamaterials, how mysterious and how out of this world some of the properties can be if they're engineered properly.
Yeah.
That's the cool thing about movies in that regard, is those writers are super creative, so they can come up with these ideas that people haven't thought about. And so once you create that as something that's possible, then, like Nadia said, you can move towards making that a reality, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure.
that's science at its foundation.
Yeah.
It's innovation.
There's also a lot of science that's probably out there that is being done that we don't necessarily know. Like after working at a
Certainly.
national lab, I mean, there is so much security stuff. We know that we can make new elements because we have these big,
Reactors.
linear accelerators and stuff,
Yeah.
right? But we don't necessarily know what's going on. I mean, because of that, and I don't know, intellectual property concerns. I don't know. Science isn't always the most accessible, unfortunately, but I think that is part of the reason why, we don't really know everything that's going on in nanotechnology, because people are still figuring it out, but they want to protect their stuff.
I think there's like a nano ethics committee too that's already been created just because there is all that potential. It could be used for the wrong reasons too. And so
That's true. That is true.
it's already been created, and so I think that's a good start, but it's just, and so we'll see where it ends up.